Record. Okay, here we go. And so I wanted to thank George Johnson, our own George Johnson, for agreeing to give this talk. I know it is not the first time he's given this talk, and hopefully certainly it will be far from the last. And I think he has a tremendous amount of wisdom to share. George, I'll let you sort of say about yourself in the introduction. I think most of the people here, if not everyone, know you, but just to I prefer when the speaker introduces themselves rather than just read something. But I know that you've been a very important voice in these conversations about Vietnam, about your experiences, and that we all have a tremendous amount to learn from you. And so really, thank you so much for taking the time. And as George and I had discussed with the timing, which we put on the flyer, this presentation really does take an hour in order for it to be the proper presentation that it should be. And so we broke it up as presentation and then Q&A so that if folks have to run, that's, you sort of know what to expect. And so in the interim, if you have any questions, clarifying questions, it's probably best to put them in the chat. And George, if you don't see them, I'll just pipe up and say, oh, someone asked a question in the chat, and then we can clarify that way. And just another technical note. So George also has some photos to be sharing throughout his presentation. And so what we'll do is I have them on my computer, and when he wants them shared, I will share my screen for about 30 seconds to a minute so that we can all look at the photo, and then I will stop the screen share and we'll resume him with the spotlight so that he can continue to speak. Are there any questions before we get started? Okay, great. And if everyone can please just, it looks like everybody already is muted, and continue that way again, unless you have a question or anything like that. And George, I will hand it over to you and I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you for inviting me to speak. And thank you to the rabbi also for the invitation. Biographical information about me is in the announcement of the lecture. I will only say that I am very happy and proud to be a member of Ohev Shalom, the National Synagogue, for the last 15 or so years, and have really benefited and grown Jewishly through my association with the synagogue, and particularly through the morning minyan and through the study of Talmud with the rabbi, and more recently studying Parsha HaShavua. And I'm currently retired as a lawyer. I was a Washington lawyer, both in the government and private practice. And I am currently a senior editor at Moment Magazine. I write a column periodically on the Jewish Word and do interviews for the magazine of various people for our symposia. And I've had quite a few publications, particularly in the Jewish world over the years. At one time, about 45 years ago, I was the research director and acting director of a Jewish think tank, and many of the articles on Jewish policy issues were published at that time. I'd like to dedicate this talk to my late dear friend, Paul Heschel Swerdlow, who passed away 36 years ago from leukemia. He was my closest friend during college and law school, and while I was in the Army and afterward. And he died quite prematurely at the age of 43. So I'm dedicating this to him. It was letters to him that form the basis of my memoir. So that's another important connection. So the story I'd like to tell you is a story of my experience as a soldier in Vietnam, and how that experience changed my life. It's a story about the relationship between duty and morality. It's a deeply personal story, sometimes difficult to talk about, but it's about a universal issue that I believe needs to be shared. It's about what happens when a soldier performs his duty, even though he has moral and political reservations about the war and what he's doing in the war, and how that experience causes him to re-examine his identity, triggering something deeply rooted within him, his Jewish identity, and how that reaction manifests itself when he returns from the war. I'm going to talk about several stories that make up the overall story as I go along. I'd like to first start with some background about me growing up, because it really does set the stage for the issues that I raise. I grew up as a Jew in a Christian world. I had this profound sense of being different, of being an outsider in the Port Washington, Long Island of the 1940s and early 50s. I was the only Jew in my class until fourth grade, singing Christmas carols and things of that sort. On the street where I played with the boys in my neighborhood, I was sometimes called names, and in reaction, I tried my best to hit the ball in punch ball or whether it was stick ball farther than anybody else to show that I was at least as good or maybe better than they were. And overall, to be accepted in their world, to prove myself. I was also a patriotic American. Memorial Day and the Memorial Day parade in Port Washington was the highlight of the year for me. My father was a volunteer fireman, and he marched in the parade, resplendent in his uniform with white pants, red shirt, flashy gold buttons, and his black fireman's hat. He was a fireman for 50 years. I was also, when I got to high school, I was the school flag bearer, which meant that I held the flag at assemblies and graduation, basketball games and things like that. There was another flag bearer, and one of us would hold the American flag and one the school flag. I also won the Rotary Club Scholarship for Citizenship when I was graduating. I had a strong sense of right and wrong. When I was president of the Honor Society in Rosslyn High School, I gave a speech about cheating in the high school, which I knew that it wasn't going to be popular, but I felt like I was willing to pay the price. And there weren't too many people coming up after me to congratulate me, except my English teacher, Mrs. Raymond. She said that she thought I'd make a fine lawyer. And there is a connection between patriotism and morality. I think I grew up thinking that they were more or less the same thing. And if you think about the years in which I was forming my personality, particularly between 6 and 11, between 1945, 1948 and 1953, these were years following World War II, when America had been the shining light on the hill, winning the war against the Nazis and the Japanese, had stopped the Chinese in Korea, and in which Stalin died in 1953. It was a time when it wasn't unreasonable to think of America and morality as the same thing. So when I went off to college, I signed up for a Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, at Cornell. It was the first year it was voluntary, actually. That was 1960. There was no, it was peacetime. There was no war going on. And even when I received my commission in graduation in June 1964, there was no war going on. People hardly knew about Vietnam. I graduated from college and went to law school at Columbia. A friend of mine, Bruce, also graduated at the same time, and also had an ROTC commission as well. And we roomed together in law school. And we both were very much affected by the growing involvement of the United States in the Vietnam conflict. And by 1967, there were over 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam. And Bruce and I both grew very concerned about the war. We believed that the war was not only unwise politically, but immoral. We had no business being there. It was a civil war. And at the same time, we knew that at some point after graduation, we might be sent to that war. In this last year of law school, we had previously not done anything about our anti-war feelings, but in the spring of 1967, we went to this big demonstration, this rally in Central Park. There were 200,000 people. And there's a picture, it's the first picture I'd like to show you of that rally. I'm not in this picture. This is a picture from the New York Times. But I look pretty much like some of those fellows in the front there. I also, during that period, I composed anti-war songs, which I played, accompanied myself on the guitar. At one time, I played at the Saturday Night Coffee House at Columbia, at Sage Chapel. So could you show the second picture, Ruth? So this is exactly almost to the day, 4 years later, April 1971. And you see me dressed there in a natty blue suit, red tie, red beard. You can't see how red it is, but it's red. And I'm giving a speech at the Vietnam Veterans Against the War encampment. And I'm saying to the press and many photographers and so on, people there, that how sorry I was. I was apologizing for the harm that I had done to my Vietnamese brothers and sisters. You might think that the 4 years bracketed by these two pictures might have been a straight line, but it was anything but. It was a period of twists and turns, once wrenching, scary, depressing, and exhilarating. I arrived in Vietnam on May 13th, 1968, along with 21 other lieutenants, all of us from Fort Hollibard's, the intelligence school there. We had all been at Fort Benning, Georgia in the fall for infantry school, and received orders to Korea, which was quite a relief at the time. However, on February 12th, on Lincoln's birthday, 1968, while at Fort Hollibard, we received orders switching our assignment to Vietnam. What happened was that the USS Pueblo, a submarine, a United States submarine off of the coast of North Korea, had been captured. And intelligence officers were immediately needed. And the class in front of us that was slated to go to Vietnam in April was switched to Korea. And we got their orders to Vietnam. Just an aside, I learned I'd say about 8 years ago in the Talmud class following the daily minyan at OHEV, that Rick Winallen, who was a regular at that time at the minyan and the Talmud study, his father was in that class ahead of me. who was slated to go to Vietnam, and he wound up going to Korea, and I went to Vietnam in his place. So just one of the things that show you how small a world it is. Anyway, the 22 lieutenants departed the plane to Vietnam in Saigon on May 13th, 1968, in the midst of war. There was an offensive going on at the time. It was a city at war, and the Viet Cong had launched something called the Tet Offensive in early February, which were attacks on every city and town in Vietnam in an attempt to overthrow the South Vietnamese government. And then a follow-up occurred when the Paris peace talks that were started on May 13th, the day we arrived, was ongoing when we arrived, and there was fighting going on as we were bused through the city to Coppola Compound to receive our assignments. We knew what we were going to be doing. We knew that as intelligence officers, we were going to be assigned to at the district level, which is like a county. There were 44 provinces and 200 and some odd districts, and we were going to be the DIOC officers, which was, DIOC meant District Intelligence Operations Coordinating Center. And we were going to be in this, set up this DIOC to collect and coordinate and disseminate intelligence from all of the Vietnamese intelligence agencies in our district, translate them, distribute them to both the information, both to intelligence, to Vietnamese combat and American combat units in our area. We were all also assigned to be Phoenix officers, Phoenix advisors. The Phoenix program was a CIA program. It was then secret, or pretty much secret. And it was a program aimed at eliminating the Viet Cong political infrastructure in the villages and towns of Vietnam. But although I listened intently to these orientations on our roles, the thing that really was concerning to me at the time was where I was going to be assigned, because there was a large difference between the combat that would be required in various districts throughout Vietnam. And I was assigned, I found out during the orientation, to one of the worst possible places, a place called Duc Way, which was on the border with Cambodia in a swamp, and it was considered Viet Cong territory. So when I departed Saigon for Duc Way, I stopped along with some other lieutenants at Bao Tri, which was the capital of the province, the Hao Nia province. And the province senior advisor, Colonel Carl Bernard, switched my assignment when he found out that I was a lawyer, and sent one of the OCS 18-year-olds to Duc Way and me to a place called Cu Chi, where the colonel thought there'd be more opportunity to do intelligence work, that as a lawyer I was might prosper better there. And Cu Chi was thought to be safer because it was under the umbrella only 2 miles from the Cu Chi base camp, which was the base camp of the US 25th Infantry Division, which had 15,000 men, an airfield, helicopters, tank brigades, and quite a bit. It was a real massive installation. And so that's where I was assigned. Ruth, could you show the next picture, which is a picture, an aerial photograph taken on the way to Cu Chi? The next one, yes. Nope, one back. Okay. So this picture shows, as you see this, there are several roads that kind of come together in the center. And to the left of that intersection, that's the compound, the district compound for Cu Chi district. It's where all the local and regional forces for the Cu Chi district were, and the district chief and his offices and his administration were there. And up at the top, up the road there at the top of, toward the horizon, is a white area. That was where the Cu Chi base camp was, where the 25th Infantry Division was. And I arrived toward the end of May about 23rd or so, in Cu Chi. And I found that it was a place in disarray. And as I learned what the situation was, it didn't seem so safe to me. During Tet, the advisor and the district compound had been overrun by the Viet Cong, and the advisor house had been burnt to the ground. The district senior advisor and his radio telegraph operator, RTO, had been killed in an ambush. And the place was a wreck. Most of the buildings had been destroyed either partially or totally. And the advisor house was a new one was under construction. And as recently as May 13th, 2 weeks before, the Viet Cong had taken over the National Police Station right across from the compound, and it took a US Air Force airstrike to get the Viet Cong out of the district town. So when I got there, it was like a prize fight where both fighters have given knockout blows, but neither fighter had went down. They just kind of staggered around. Even a touch probably would have forced one of them to the ground, but neither one had the strength to do so. And so for the immediate time I was there at Cu Chi District, nobody was doing anything. They were kind of licking their wounds, rebuilding. And the same thing was largely true of the Viet Cong. Although there were reports all the time that they were going to attack, it never happened during the first months that I was there. And by the same token, when I went around to the what was supposed to be the DIOC, the intelligence office, where the my counterpart, the intelligence officer of the Vietnamese forces in the district, I found that they knew nothing about the Phoenix program, collecting intelligence. They had no files. They didn't know what the concept of the Viet Cong infrastructure, political infrastructure was. And I found that to be largely true when I went to the National Police. They had files actually, about 500 cards with names on it, but nothing much else. And they didn't want to share that information with the S2, his name was Trung Nguyen Luet, that was in the compound, the Vietnamese intelligence officer I worked with. And I saw that I had a real problem ahead of me trying to get Vietnamese intelligence collected and coordinated in one place. And then I met this head of this organization called the PRU, which was part of the Phoenix program. It stood for Provincial Reconnaissance Units. There was in the district, it was a 15-man squad of mercenaries, people made up of kind of unsavory characters, people who were ex-convicts, people who had been discharged from the army for bad behavior. And this was the group that I had been assigned to carry out raids on the district, towns and villages and hamlets to round up Viet Cong political cadre. And when I met the head of the squad, it suddenly dawned on me what I was being asked to do. And it was do raids in the town, in the district villages to pick up, capture, and if necessary, kill Viet Cong political cadre, civilians. This was something that I had a hard time digesting. And around the same time, there was an article in Newsweek, which made it clear that it wasn't a totally secret program, characterizing the people as thugs and assassins. So I as I said, I was really disturbed by this requirement, this assignment. And around the same time, I had this idea that I could start my intelligence collection activities off by converting these PRU people into two-man intelligence cells to go out into the district, towns and villages and hamlets to collect intelligence. So we would try to figure out what the Viet Cong and the political activities were going on in the villages and hamlets. And that's what I did. It wasn't authorized by the program, but nobody was really telling me what to do, so that's what I did. And I thought, well, I killed two birds with one stone. I got them doing something that I thought was comfortable with, and I also was able to get intelligence started for my diop. Over the next 3 or 4 months, this proved to be extremely successful. And I was getting up to 30 intelligence reports a week from the PRU about what was going on. Colonel Bernard found out about this and was tracking it from the province capital, and came by one day and asked me if I would go to Saigon with him to explain what I was doing to the people in Saigon. So the next day, we drove down to the capital, and he brought me into this very leafy part of Saigon, next to the presidential palace, to a French villa where we went into the villa, and I was introduced to Colonel William Greenwald, who was, I didn't know what he was, but he turned out to be the head of the Phoenix program in Vietnam. And I briefed him about what I was doing, and he didn't have any comments. And so we had a second briefing to go to, and Colonel Bernard and I were driving there, and we stopped to pick up somebody he knew. It was a colonel, Marine colonel named William Rotc, who knew Bernard, and they got into a conversation about who should be running the PRU, these mercenaries in the districts, whether it should be under the CIA or the Vietnamese. He dropped Rotc off at some appointment. Then he was invited by Bernard to lunch, and later he came back and we had lunch together after my second briefing. And the second briefing was with head of what was called the Census Grievance Program. I didn't catch his name. And again, it was in another fancy villa in that same area. And this man congratulated me on the work I was doing. And he said, at that time I was a captain. He said, Captain Johnson, I assume that you're going to be promoted to a major very soon. So I kept quiet because only a week or two before I had become a captain. And when Rotc, Colonel Rotc joined us, he had what I thought were some really good questions to my briefing. And I thought this guy has a really good head for intelligence. And I had no idea, first of all, that he wasn't really a colonel. He was actually the CIA man in Saigon, who was the head of the national PRU program. So it was kind of ironic. I didn't find this out until years later. So we left there and drove back to Saigon, during which time Bernard asked me questions about what kind of a lawyer I was, and he noted that he sort of continued the conversation he had been having with Rotc about who should control the Viet Cong and not the Viet Cong, the PRU, and he said, these guys in Saigon, they don't know what's going on in the countryside. The colonel, the province chief and the district chief would never stand for American control of these PRUs. It would to the front to their face in dignity. It seemed like he didn't like the way the conversation with Rotc had ended, and he was picking it up, and it ended up with me on a bitter note. When we got back to Saigon, from Saigon to Cu Chi, things started to change. Suddenly I was getting visits from all kinds of high-level commanders, 1, 2, and 3-star generals. Even somebody from the Joint Chief of Staff in Washington, reporters from the Washington Post and other media that were covering the war, to see what was going on. Apparently it had gotten out that I was a good person to talk to about what was going on in this part of Vietnam with the war. And it was now only an hour ride from Saigon, so they could safely get to the boonies and back to Saigon in the evening and find out what was going on. And I was in fact getting visits from unit commanders to coordinate, to get intelligence information about where to do their operations in the district. And I was feeling important, kind of good about myself. And one way I know I was feeling good and actually was happy, Ruth, could you show the picture of the next picture of me? The next one, after that. That's the DIOC that I eventually built. Next one, there we go. Well, this was taken while I was still a lieutenant, first lieutenant, but it shows me happy. The reason I know I was happy is that I got a tape from my mother, and she said, we were exchanging tapes instead of letters. And she said, George, I expected you to be lonely and depressed, and you actually sound happy. That was a surprise to me. And so I know I was happy at the time because my mother told me. The next story involves what happened with the PRU and the snatch operations that I was sent on or led on to. There was always the possibility, the strong possibility, that the intelligence would lead, the PRU got, would lead to reaction operations. And that is eventually what happened. And there was actually no way out of this combat portion of the work that they were doing. Is that they were the one unit that I actually had operational responsibility for. So one day, I'll give you an example. One day, the head of the PRU came over to me in my office and said that he had found, somebody in the PRU had found 2 teenage boys loitering near the school, truant from school, and the PRU fellow had interrogated them and searched them and found a hand grenade taped to the leg of one of them. And on interrogation, they had said to the PRU guy that they were recruited by the VC to throw grenades in the marketplaces of the towns. And that they knew of other teenagers who had been similarly recruited, and they could take us, the PRU, there. And so the head of the PRU, Mr. Tak, came over to me and asked me to drive them to, with these 2 people, 2 young boys that had been captured, to the town. It was a neighboring town, Tan Tong town, to capture these people, these other boys who had been recruited. And we drove into Tan Tong village and stopped at a house, and the PRU jumped out with the with the two sources, the two boys, with their hands were tied behind their backs. And they went into this house, and they came out with two other young men. They were blindfolded and hands tied behind their backs, and with a hand grenade. The PRU guy showed me a hand grenade that he had found in the house. They went back and into the village. They put these two prisoners, in the back of the Jeep where I was standing with my M16 rifle. I was asked to guard them. Not verbally, but with motions, because he had no interpreter. They went back into the village to look for the other boys that the sources had found. And I'm standing there with my M16 rifle, and I'm thinking, what happens if these people run? Could I shoot them? How would I stop them? What would it look like if they ran and I just let them go? And I was thinking to myself, don't run. Please don't run. And it was a very awkward situation, but luckily soon the PRU came back from their task of looking for the other boys, and they put their prisoner in the Jeep, and somehow all of us were able to get back, drove back in the Jeep to the compound where now the four captured people were incarcerated. There was another similar event. It actually didn't happen with it was a snatch operation that involved a source from the 25th Infantry Division, a lieutenant. Actually, he was a fellow Jew from South Africa, a landsman, he called himself. And he came down to the village, to the town, and asked me to provide two policemen that he had a VC source that could identify 4 political people in Tan Phu Trung village. So one was supposedly an agricultural person, another was a propaganda person. So I went into his Jeep, and the Jeep with the policeman followed. We went down to Tan Phu Trung, a few miles down Road Highway 1, and we pulled up at this house in the middle of the village, and the American soldiers jumped out along with this lieutenant, and ran into the house where we stopped. And soon I could hear screaming, and this old lady screaming was being let out of the house by a national policeman. And the relatives in the house realized what was going on, and they started yelling at us and screaming, and the woman was wailing. And I thought to myself, I winced. I said to myself, what could this old lady be doing that could be a problem? But the Viet Cong source said that she was a VC agent, and she was taken away by the police. And I left and went back to the compound. That night on radio watch, I was thinking about what went on. And I thought to myself, this was really like what happened to the Jews over hundreds of years, being rounded up by people who hated them and feared them in Europe. And it was an uncomfortable feeling. I thought to myself, I'm doing my job, I'm doing my duty, but what's the price I'm paying? So you may be wondering, I'm going on to my next story, you may be wondering, well, where is the Jewish angle? Where did that come in? Did I become a Baal Teshuvah while I was there? No, nothing like that. But what did happen was my moral bearings became dislodged. Um, as I said earlier, I had equated being an American soldier with doing the right thing. It never occurred to me before Vietnam that this would ever be a problem, but it was starting to be a problem. It wasn't just what I was doing in Vietnam, it was what I was seeing back home. As I looked to see what was going on back in America, I didn't recognize the America that America had become. Shortly before I had left, Martin Luther King had been assassinated on April 4th, 1968. On June 5th, Robert Kennedy, this is 1968, had been assassinated just as he was, after he accepted, the victory in Los Angeles in the California Democratic presidential primary. And then in August, the Democratic National Convention, the riots and the bedlam that occurred there, I realized that it seemed like the war had come home to America. I was wondering whether the America that I left and that I was fighting for, the exceptionalism that I believed in America, would be there when I got back. And about this time, I was driving out of the Cu Chi base camp in my Jeep, and I was passing the chapel, the base camp chapel, and I noticed for the first time, I'd never seen it before, this big blue flag with a white Star of David on it. And I was really stunned. I said, could there be a Jewish chaplain here at Cu Chi base camp? And I went inside, I got out of the Jeep, and in the front, I saw this soldier who was actually a captain. He was a doctor, a Jewish, I think he was a psychiatrist in the front of the chapel. And I asked him what was going on. He said, you know, we have services. We have Shabbat service here. It's Friday night and Saturday. And you're invited. Please come back on Shabbat. So that's what I did. I knew that I couldn't go on Friday night because I couldn't leave the compound at night. I had radio watch and security was bad at night. So the next Saturday, I drove up there in my Jeep, and I walked in and I saw in the front about half a dozen soldiers praying, davening, and actually somebody was reading the Torah, and I couldn't believe it. I said, "There's a Sefer Torah here in Vietnam," and it was a revelation. There was this island of holiness in the midst of this really profane war that was ongoing just outside. You could even hear, you know, the howitzers going and the helicopters, of course, outside. Chaplain, after services, there was a kiddush, and they had challah that was baked by a Jewish private in the base camp bakery. And we had, there was bologna and salami that had been sent by the Jewish Welfare Board to these two officers who kept a kosher kitchen there. And we had challah, and we had rugula or some sort of thing. And I resolved to come back. It was this island of holiness in the midst of the war. And it was 3 weeks later, I was coming out. It was about 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and I was about to get into my Jeep and drive up. You can see I wasn't Shomer Shabbos. And this fellow came out of the, Vietnamese fellow came out of the intelligence office and motioned for me to come with him. And he ran out of the compound, out of the front gate, into the village nearby, into the village and to this mud cottage with a thatched roof. And there was this people milling around outside. And as I approached, they parted, and I could see there were two dead bodies. There was a man and a woman with blood spattered on them. They were lying in a sexual position, and there was a note pinned to one of them. It was a judgment of execution by the VC, and it said that this is what happens when people inform on the VC. It was really a startling situation to view. But there was nothing I could do. I walked out and I went back to the compound and folded in reports to the Vietnamese and to the American units about what had happened. Then I got back into my Jeep and I drove up to the chapel, and I noticed outside the chapel there were these men milling around outside. Ruth, do you have that picture? And I asked them, well, what's going on? And it turned out the two officers who were reading Torah, they had rotated back to this, no, not that one, the one before. No, before. Yeah, no. It's the men outside the chapel. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There we go. I skipped the part from time. I skipped the part of the talk about the coordinate search operation. This is what, there were 9 of them, and I made the minion. But they were milling around outside because they didn't have a minion. They had no one to daven. So I said, I can daven. So I went in and led services. I picked out my favorite melodies and prayers. And it was a beautiful feeling. I said Kaddish for the dead American soldiers. And it really was a very peaceful kind of feeling that came over me. And I thought about it and I said, how is it that this is kind of a jarring thing? Here I came from this brutal assassination to this, and here I am able to kind of remove myself, separate myself from all of that and feel this peace in this Jewish world. And I wondered about how I was able to lock that part out, cut myself off from that. And I thought about it some more later, and I realized that it wasn't just in the situation of the chapel service that I was doing this, that I was actually doing it generally in my life, in my work in the district. Ruth, could you put the next picture of yeah, that picture. That, here I was living with the Vietnamese. There were about 200 Vietnamese soldiers living in the compound with me. And you could see the hovels that they lived in behind these 2 cute children who were children of the soldiers that were stationed in the compound. And I saw every aspect of Vietnamese life. I saw women breastfeeding their children, taking baths at the well in the middle of the compound, which I did too initially before we had running water in our building. And I saw the Vietnamese dying around us almost every day. And yet I was able to somehow block off this part of what was happening. And an example was, we had a washroom where I would shave and wash in the morning that overlooked the morgue, the town and morgue where the district soldiers who were killed they were brought in green body bags, and then they were put in coffins, and where their loved ones, their wives came, and I could hear them wailing, and I could smell the incense. It was right outside where I was washing in the morning. But I decided, I turned away. I did not look at what was going on. And I was experiencing a kind of moral amnesia. I was actually able to somehow separate what I was doing in the war from what was happening all around me, that somehow or other I was blocking out all the death that was around me. So I will skip, in the interest of time, to my coming home. I left in May 1969. I rotated back to the States, and I spent 3 months at Fort Holabird in the center of the intelligence command. And I got a job as an attorney in the Treasury Department in Washington through a law professor of mine, Richard Gardner, who got me a really plum job in the Treasury Department working in international affairs. And I had a girlfriend, and I just blocked out the war. I pretended I was not there. I did speak at anti-war rally in November 1969, November 15th. It was a moratorium. I spoke at against the war in November at the Delphi University on Long Island and at the John Jay Police College in Manhattan. But otherwise, I just blocked it all out and pursued my career and my social life. For 6 months, it was all well and good. But then May 1970 happened. And the first weekend of May, on Friday, Richard Nixon invaded, not personally, but he sent troops into Cambodia. And it really was a shock to me, because I had, in my mind, forgotten about the war, because I felt that the war was on its way to being concluded and not being started up again by the Nixon administration. And it really was a shock to me. And but two other things happened in short succession. On Sunday, I had been invited to a Jewish wedding on Long Island, and I went up to it, and I expected a beautiful traditional ceremony. One of the most spiritual occasions that Jews have is a wedding. And instead, what I found was pretty much just a big party with very little that felt Jewish at all. And maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was appalled. And I said to myself, I didn't say it to anybody else, but I said, if this is what's happening to the Jewish life in America, I have to do something to change it. The next day I went back to Washington, and the next day was May 4th, Monday, May 4th. It was the day of the Kent State killings. People may remember, if they're old enough, or at least maybe they've seen the picture that represents that day to the world and to the country, which was a young woman, actually she was a teenager, kneeling on the pavement before a dead student, a male student, with her shrieking, with her hands stretched out above her head. Four students were killed by the Ohio National Guard that had shot, opened fire with live ammunition on unarmed student protesters against the war. And this was the day, an event that changed my life, because I decided if there's any time to come out of my post-war reverie, this was it. And all my feelings came gushing out. And I realized at that time that ultimately I would need to leave my job and somehow do something, get involved. I searched around in Washington. I found actually a Jewish group that was anti-war and social activist. They were protesting Jewish slumlords in the Washington in the district, and they were having meetings in the evening, and I went to them, and it was really an eye opener. It was the first time in my life that I saw young Jews connecting their Judaism with political action, and I was intrigued, and I wound up joining this group and participating in it. It involved anti-war activity, demonstrations. I wrote letters to the editor. I wrote articles for this organization called Jews for Urban Justice in their newsletter. We even planted a tree of peace on the Capitol grounds. We were stopped by the Capitol Police, actually, when we were doing it. Later, Senator Gravel of Alaska got a resolution passed to allow us to plant the tree, and we actually later did plant the tree there. Tree of Peace, I believe it was a peach tree. I don't think it's there anymore. I think through renovation of the Capitol grounds, some trees got removed and that one did. But I started a process of disconnecting from the life I had been leading, and pulling myself away from the success path that I had been on since the time I was 5 years old. It took a whole year from May 1970 until May 1971 for me to come to terms. It was a similar feeling to the way I was feeling in the spring of 1968 when I was facing my service in Vietnam, or in 1967 when I had to go on active duty. But this time I wasn't in the Army, and I actually did have a choice. I had one foot in the anti-war movement, in the Jewish counterculture, and one foot in the government. Actually, the Treasury Department was across the street from Richard Nixon, the person that had so set me off the first weekend in May, 1970. And I found it, I was doing pretty innocuous activities. I was writing, approving loan agreements for Boeing for the Export-Import Bank loans and writing legislation. I was writing international aid organization charters for the African Development Bank, I think it was, and doing that kind of activity. But working for Richard Nixon, I felt like I was working directly for Richard Nixon, and it felt like it was intolerable. I couldn't do it anymore, and it took me 2 months to work up my courage. But in May 1971, I walked into my boss's office. He was the Assistant General Counsel for International Affairs. He had this palatial office. One window looked down at the mall at the Washington Monument, and one looked down Pennsylvania Avenue at the Capitol. And I walked in and I said, Mike, I couldn't tell him actually why I was actually leaving. I said, I'm going to be leaving the Treasury Department at the end of the month. I want to write my memoir on Vietnam, and I want to live in the country. And that's what I did. I quit my job. And when my parents found out, my father cried. I'd really hurt my parents, but I wasn't thinking, I was thinking about, I could not do this anymore. And even though it was the most difficult thing I'd ever done and have ever done in my life, breaking this cord of success that I'd started when I was a kid, and dropping out into a world I didn't know what was going to happen. It was like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. That's what it felt like. But it was also liberating. I did, in fact, rent a farm, 200 acres in the Shenandoah Valley in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountain that summer. And I started my memoir. And I wrote songs. I wrote a melody to Yigdal. And I hosted retreats for this Jewish counterculture organization that I helped start. Brangan was the name of it. It was one of the first Havarot. And I made being Jewish the center of my life. I went to Israel to work on a kibbutz, to an Orthodox kibbutz to live. I went to an Ulpan to try to live what was a holistic Jewish life. And I basically turned my life around and made Judaism the center of it. I through this world that I had entered, I had some really good fortune. I met my wife, Aya, and I had two wonderful children who are now parents, have sons. We have three grandsons. And my life is centered around my Jewishness. And it was a transformative experience. I will not go into, there's one more story I have to tell, but because I've gone over the time I allotted, I will not go into it, but just safe to tell you that this is something I talked about 5 years ago, actually, about the time of Parshat Kitisa, that I went back to Vietnam in 2016, and I met one of the guerrillas I had been fighting and trying to find at the time. And the purpose of the visit was to reconcile myself with this former Viet Cong guerrilla that I met at the Cu Chi tunnels. I talked about this 5 years ago at Shabbat services at Oheb. And as I was leaving, was there with my friend Bruce and our wives. As we were leaving, I told him, I want to say something to you. I want to apologize for all the harm that I caused to your people. And he said to me, you know, it isn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. It was the American government. You were just doing your job. Okay. So Ruth, are there any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me, Jeff Burt?
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
How did you
lost the picture?
Wait, me? Okay. What happened to me? I don't know.
I don't know. Let me see if I can find the picture.
Right here. Here. Okay. Okay. I'm coming back. My question for you. You don't really. I know what's wrong. My question to you: how did you feel about that response of the Viet Cong leader, the guerrilla, who you tried to kill in earlier incarnations of yourself?
How did I feel?
How did you feel?
Well, I was shaken. I was shaken. You mean right at the time? At the time, it was a very difficult thing to do. My wife didn't want me to do it, actually. But his reaction made me feel like this is why I came. This is why I came to Vietnam, to reconcile myself in some way with what had happened. You know, it's telling this story has not only in the memoir that I wrote that you have access to for a moment, but actually telling it orally to you has a kind of a liberating effect. I've been studying Hilchot Teshuvah, Maimonides' Laws of Repentance. And part of repentance is confession and actually talking about it is healing. So, and the fact is that even though I was able to somehow work my way back into mainstream life, it really set my course, this breaking with what I had done, actually coming to grips with what I had done. I know not everybody agrees with this point of view, but for me, I was able to start this journey, this Jewish journey that has been liberating for me. And so I have no regrets.
Thank you.
Did someone else have a question also? You can just unmute yourselves to ask. I mean, I definitely have a question, but if anyone else wants to go first.
I have one more question.
Please, Jeff, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
George, as you know, I'm a contemporary, and by the luck of the draw, I was able to avoid the draft. Was there anything in your Jewish upbringing that was sufficiently unique or different, because I sense I had a similar upbringing, that led you on this path back the way you did? Because frankly, we both know many contemporaries who wouldn't have taken the path you did. And I'm just curious, looking back, was there anything about your upbringing, your Jewish upbringing, exposure, that led you back the way you did?
You know, at the beginning of the talk, I tried to set out these three factors: my being a Jew in a Christian world and feeling othered, my patriotism, my equation of America with morality, and this disconnection of those two things that I sensed in 1968. And, the fact is that I did have a deep sense of being Jewish. I felt Jewish to my core, but the path that I was on was a path of assimilation, trying to be an American. When I started questioning whether I was doing the right thing and that my American patriotism somehow is leading me away from what I thought was the moral course of action, I had this alternative way of this other identity. And then I grabbed onto it. It was there. I had enough of a Jewish neshama that I had a place to turn. I had a moral compass that was available to me, and I grabbed onto it.
This is Gray. I'm an Army brat, and goes back generations in various military service in my family. So in like 64, 65, the war was going on in Vietnam. It was very, at a very low level, but there's, and I was pro-war, no question about it. And then while at Berkeley in 69, I became involved in the anti-war movement by veterans who had come back, such as yourself, who were I think you may recall, the group was called Veterans Against the War in Vietnam. And I was at Berkeley, and there was a strong anti-war movement. And I became very involved in it. I was against the war, but not against the soldiers, right? I wanted all my friends, who were many, who had gone, to come back safely, and I wanted them home. My friends and their fellow service people, not all of them did. I was appalled, and to this day it angers me at the reception that they received when they returned home. I'm getting a little emotional because I'm still angered by it. But you know, as you were talking today at the very beginning, these memories for me are so painful. It's difficult to confront them. And I'm interested in, I mean, my husband just came down and he said, what's going on? And I shared with him, I said, it was so painful for me to listen to your comments that I almost got off the Zoom call, but I didn't want to be disrespectful. But I want to know how you are able. I mean, I had shallow breathing while I'm listening to you, right? It's that painful. How you have been, how you have accomplished the ability to look honestly at those events and still be able to manage them without deep sense of pain and loss.
It's a really hard question, a good question. Let me just preface my answer with a comment. You may recall I mentioned Colonel Carl Bernard in my talk. He became, just before he retired, he became the head of the ROTC program at Berkeley in the early 70s, I believe it was. And he became a very popular speaker. Even among anti-war people. And I don't know whether you were there at the time, probably not, you're too young. But it turned out that Colonel Bernard was more sympathetic with my point of view than I ever realized. But to answer your question, I think it was the catharsis. It was the very, I don't know if I conveyed just, I guess maybe I did, just how difficult the situation it was, how hard it was for me to quit my life, basically, to throw away my career, basically, as I was about 29, 28 years old. As an attorney, something I'd worked toward all my life. It was very hard, very painful, and it was only because I had this very strong feeling that I was doing the right thing. I was part of this anti-war group, this Jewish group that I remained in for several years afterward, until there was a big support. Actually, I broke with that group because I found that my politics changed and it was way too left for me. But I think it was that just my feeling that I was doing the right thing and that I somehow would wind up on my feet. I had been pretty successful up until then. And believe me, it made life more difficult when I decided to go back to law. But I felt like I was stronger and that a lot of the great things that happened in my life happened because I made that break, that I reunited my life with my Judaism. And, you know, I think it was I had support. I had the moral support of my Judaism. And was a big risk. And I understand how you could have felt that pain, because I feel it too.
Thank you for your comment. I appreciate it.
George, can I ask, this is so powerful, thank you. And I really, what you said about slowly realizing that maybe the country you thought you were fighting for wasn't actually what you thought it was. I'm curious, when you see even something as recent as the Black Lives Matter increased protests after the killing of George Floyd this past year, and some, Americans throughout, I guess, the decades after come to those realizations about different causes. If that's something that you identify with, or how, if that resonates with you, if you relate to it.
Well, the demonstration that really resonates most closely is what happened on January 6th of this year. And that to me is the war coming home. That to me is the war coming home. This is, I think, unfortunately, the events of the last year have made what I'm saying, what I'm talking about, I think, relevant, more relevant than unfortunately they should be. The America that I went to war to defend or to support, I think became the roots of what we see today. This division started with, and excuse me if I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm just going to say, the lies that started the Vietnam War. And people lost faith in the government. People stopped believing the government. And the fruits of that have developed over the years. The lack of civility that I noticed when I went into private practice in the late 80s, the civility among lawyers. I remember one of the Court of Appeals judges came to speak at my law firm. It was then at Swidler in Berlin, talking about the lack of civility of lawyers in the courts that she was before. She was judging, and that has spread throughout society. And this division, this polarization, I think many point to other things, but for me, it started with the Vietnam War.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question, or else we can wrap up.
George, this is Bob. Thank you very much for your talk. I had heard some of it, previously and when you spoke last time, and just from speaking to you in general. But on your last point, I agree with you tremendously, but I think it's become much, much worse in the last couple of years, the last 4 years to be blunt. And it's been stoked, it's been deepened, we've legitimized the hatred and the bigotry that's been below the surface. And I think that's a whole nother session. That could be a fascinating session to have and a discussion like this and on the current events and even what's happening now and how the events of January 6th are being reconfigured away from an insurrection into a leftist kind of stoking. And that's what caused. So we live in very, very dangerous times. And my father fought in World War II, the entire war, from landing in North Africa through the end he was in Europe through the end of the war. And and it's a different country. It really is, to think that this is the country that he and his generation fought for. And it's sort of similar to what you're going through, you've gone through. So this is just a general comment, but thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you, Bob, for your comment. I agree with you. And this is profound for people of my age and perhaps your age. It's this profound sense of loss, that we've really lost something that was really wonderful. The respect for the institutions.
Absolutely.
That we grew up with, the government belief, you know. I graduated high school in 1960. We were the generation of new generation of Americans who were, that Kennedy was speaking about when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. That was my generation. And we were in the civil rights movement. We were people who believed in America. And I personally still do. And I feel like we've got to save it somehow. And I believe that there is a young generation out there, our kids' generation, that's on the right path, and that with the perseverance and with help, maybe we can right the ship.
I am hopeful in a way, but I'm pessimistic in another way, because I never feared for the country. I'm a liberal Democrat. No matter who was in power, I may have disagreed with their politics, but I never feared that they didn't have the best interest of the country at heart. Until this last 4 years, I thought it was just unbelievable, and it was just the undoing of America. It's like what's his name's book, The Plot Against America.
Mm-hmm.
We're living through it.
Yeah. Well,
we can talk offline more.
Let's not end this on this note. Let's just.
Well, let's land it on the birth of your grandson and the birth of my grandson.
And mine, I have twin grandsons.
Oh, mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Wow.
But a rabbi from Addis gave a talk months ago, in which she said, and it was in the heart of the Trump earness, and she said, even in the darkness, you can see light. Even in the darkest, you just need to look for it and go towards it. And so that's the note I'm ending this on. I'm going to look for the light and go for it. And hope the rest of our nation does the same.
Amen. Great. Thank you very much.
Well, George, thank you so much for this really marvelous presentation. I just really appreciate everything you shared. It's really fascinating.
Yes, thank you, George.
Thank you.
We'll post the recording also in the Shoal emails as soon as it's available. We'll have it up on YouTube. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much.
Yeah. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Bye, all.
Okay, you too. Thank you, everyone.
I'll talk to you later tonight, Rabbi.
Have a good afternoon.